Washington Journal continues.
Dr. Cornel West is a philosophy and Christian practice professor at Union Theological Seminary, also an independent presidential candidate, talking about his candidacy on Washington Journal this morning. Dr. West, good morning.
It's a blessing to be here. You're very kind to have me, my brother. And I hope you and your loved ones are doing well.
Thank you very much for that. Dr. West, if you had to boil down your candidacy into a few sentences, what will you tell people?
It would be, it's based on the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and Fannie Lou Hamer, which is trying to get beyond the lies, beyond all the hatred, beyond all the revenge, and try to talk about truth, justice, and love in a context in which it seems as if it's very, very difficult to have any moments of substantive morality. Politics has become just legalized corruption and normalized bribery, where people will say anything to stay in office, and there's no genuine concern for people, let alone poor people, working people, people who have been subjugated, people who've been degraded. And this is not just empty moral rhetoric. If we give up on serious commitment to public life and citizens being human beings, as opposed to just objects to be manipulated and elites to reproduce more lies, more hatred, more revenge, then the country's over. I mean, the American project, as we've understood it, would be over. And I'm just trying to do the best that I can to raise my voice, to mobilize people, and to get people to see that Trump's leading us toward a second civil war and Biden's leading us toward a third world war. And we've got to do better than those two in terms of an option at this particular moment in the history of this country.
If you were president, then what would a Cornel West administration do to change the plight of poor people specifically than others have promised or, and I guess in your opinion, haven't delivered yet?
Well, I mean, Biden has just authorized $200 billion for B-21 bombers. We could abolish poverty with a little over $200 billion. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to poverty, just like Martin King. I'm an abolitionist when it comes to homelessness. I just spent wonderful time with my brothers and sisters there on the East Side Cafe here in Los Angeles at El Sereno Community Garden. No housing. I was just at Skid Row with Master Q in Los Angeles. Skid Row has thousands and thousands of people. How can we be the richest nation in the history of the world and have so many poor people and homeless people? Well, we got organized greed in the real estate industry. You got organized greed when it comes to housing, organized greed when it comes to healthcare, more and more organized greed when it comes to education. This is what happens when you have organized greed unleashed on a society with little accountability, and the most vulnerable are those who are most affected. It's got to be a moral compass when you talk about leadership in the country. And you know that's so true in regard to the genocide and the ethnic cleansing and the ugly apartheid-like conditions in Gaza. That's a fundamental moral litmus test. We sit there and watch it taking place and still enable more billions of dollars to allow the military equipment that we produce from our tax money to go to killing and maiming children, 13,000 precious Palestinian children, and we act as if we can do nothing. I mean, this is spiritual sickness, my brother. It really is. And that's true for any people, no matter who it would be, black, white, red, Jewish, Lithuanian, or Ethiopian. But in this case, they're Palestinian, but it's in Gaza. I see it in LA. I see it, of course, in New York. I see it in Chicago. And yet we want to congratulate ourselves as if somehow the economy is doing so well and we're bouncing back. No, we are in a spiritual, moral, and political crisis of profound proportions. And we need to get beyond the lies and the revenge and the hatred and talk about truth, justice, and love that begins with treating poor and working people with dignity.
If you want to ask our guest questions, you can do so on the lines, 202-748-8000, 1 for Republicans, 202-748-8000 for Democrats, Independents, 202-748-8002. Dr. West, forgive me if I'm wrong, do you have any political background, and what do you think about electing someone to office without political background?
Well, I think what we need really, my dear brother, is we need new persons, new characters, and new visions injected into our system. So my political background is I've been fighting for poor and working people for 55 years. Now, I've worked with a number of different candidates over those 55 years. No doubt about that. Sometimes they're within the Democratic Party. Sometimes they've been outside. More and more they've been outside because the Democratic Party itself has succumbed to capture by Wall Street and Pentagon, by the war profiteers on the one hand and the money makers on the other. But the Republican Party had given up on a long time ago in terms of it being captured by big money. So that it's true that people would look at me and say, well, you've never actually been an elected official. That's exactly right. I have been an active citizen trying to ensure that truth and justice can procure a place in American politics. And that's very much what I would do as president. I would set a completely different tone, a completely different vibe coming from the White House. And that would be poor and working people. You are at the center of public policy, not Wall Street, not looking at the stock market, but rather Main Street and looking at access to healthcare, access to quality education, access to safe communities, access to housing. Housing is a human right, just like healthcare is a human right. And we've got to push back these predators who've been pushing out so many poor and working people when it comes to housing and a whole host of other fields in our society.
On your website, sir, one of the things that you advocate for is a wealth tax on all billionaire holdings and transactions, a $27 minimum wage, and establishing a federal universal basic income commission amongst them. But to the first part, as far as the wealth tax is concerned, I know that President Biden has called for increased taxes on the wealthy, but what's your definition of a wealth tax? How would that work in your mind?
Well, I mean, the wealth tax really is something that's very difficult to enforce. So as much as I would put it on paper very strongly and have high taxes for the wealthy, we know the wealthy are so clever with their brilliant lawyers and create loopholes. I'm much more concerned about disinvesting from the military. 62 cents for every $1 in the discretionary budget in Washington goes to the military. We've got 800 military units around the world, and we got special operations in 130 countries. We've got to cut back massively in military that goes directly into universal basic income. As you know, Alaska was the first state to endorse me, the Aurora Party, in part because we agree there ought to be a basic universal income, a social net below which citizens cannot fall, so that it's much more easier to disinvest from military and reinvest directly into satisfying basic social needs than to follow through on wealth tax, because we can have some of the most marvelous wealth tax on paper, and you can't execute it, my brother, because the loopholes are still there, and the lawyers are hired, and the tax evasion, in Cayman Islands, the story, how difficult it is to follow through. So yes, I do support that on paper, but in terms of actually gaining resources for poor and working people, other than supporting that strong minimum wage that you noted, and strong wing of the trade union movement that's willing to fight for benefits and contribute to a robust public life in the country, that we've just got to engage in a disinvestment of significance from military into satisfying basic social needs of our citizens. I was in schools. I go to schools all the time, brother. I see more policemen in the elementary schools than I see nurses and counselors. Can you imagine if that was the case I'm much older than you, but you and I going to school? Good God Almighty, these are precious students in the hoods, in the barrios, the reservation, poor whites. What kind of future are we talking about with that militarized context? And I was just in Cop City at Atlanta. We see the militarization, not just of the police, but of any security officers. Why? Because as society begins to decay and decline, we appeal first resort to military. And we end up with more and more mass shootings, militaristic ways of dealing with conflict. That's a sign of a country that's going under. We've got to fight back. We've got to be countervailing forces against this kind of organized greed and institutionalized hatred and routinized indifference to the most vulnerable. And I speak
Okay.
also as a Christian. So I believe that the least of these, the 25th chapter of Matthew, is a fundamental lens to which to view the world. What you do to prisoners, what you do to the poor, the elderly, the children, the orphan, the widow, the
Yep.
fatherless, the motherless. That's the criteria.
Well, Dr. West, we have calls lined up for you, and we want you to talk to these folks. Let's start with Joan.
Right.
Joan in New York, Republican line. You're on with Dr. Cornel West. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Hello.
You're on. Go ahead.
I'm on.
Yep, Joan, go ahead. You're on with our guest.
Okay, listen to me there. I would like to know why that a president can only serve 8 years and the senators make their life living staying there. I think that after 8 years, they should all get the hell out. They're old. They're senile, half of them. And the Nancy Pelosi's and the Paul Schumers, Democrat, Republican, I don't care who you are. After 8 years, you should get out. They shouldn't have any more than 8 years.
Okay, that's Joan there.
Oh, I do agree with my dear sister, Citizen Joan. She's absolutely right. We got to rotate. We got to have the rotation of elites. But one of the reasons why you don't rotate, because they get in there, Sister Joan, and feel so comfortable. They get in there and so well adjusted to the unjust status quo. They want to reproduce themselves. And there's no accident. They get richer, richer, and richer as the country itself gets in deeper and deeper crisis.
From Jay in Democrats line in Washington, D.C., you're on with Cornel West. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. West. Jay Waxy here, calling from the stolen lands of the Piscataway and Anacostan people, also known as Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for your comments on dropping the military-industrial complex. Really appreciate that, home and abroad. Kind of a two-part question for you, if you would. I worked for the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I also know there aren't many things humanity needs right now more than a free Palestine, a Palestine free from bombs, and one where they're free to eat and drink water, clean water. And so I asked a two-part question here of what must we learn from the Bernie Sanders campaigns in our presidential arena in this country, and how can those learnings get us to anything closer to a liberated Palestine? Thank you, y'all.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Brother Jay, very much so. I had two campaigns with my dear brother Bernie Sanders, and I still have a love for my brother, but we've got agreements sometimes much deeper than one would think. And one of the lessons I think we can learn is that the Democratic Party is beyond redemption when it comes to dealing with poor and working people, both in America and when it comes to dealing with precious Palestinians in Gaza. What do I mean by that? I mean, it's either window dressing in terms of acting as if they have some deep commitment to working people. Yes, they've made some significant moves in the last few years, but overall, Biden's been in the back pocket of Wall Street. He, of course, bailed out Wall Street along with Obama and let Main Street dangle. He's been in the back pocket of credit card companies in Delaware and other places. And when it comes to Gaza, oh my God, you see crimes against humanity, war crimes every day. You see a crime of genocide, and Matthew Miller could sit up there and say, I don't see any violation of international law. Quit lying. Pentagon, quit lying. State Department, quit lying. We're seeing these crimes against humanity every day. And then respond only when Arab and Muslim voters begin to vote against the Democratic Party. So it becomes a matter of electoral political strategy. No, we want somebody with moral backbone. You don't respond to genocide solely because you got electoral strategy. What are you going to do? Create a pier that will take 2 months when you got children being shot, famine escalating? Where is the moral fiber? It's not there. Biden talks about we're going to redeem the soul of the nation. That's the very slogan, the motto of Martin Luther King Jr.'s organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You don't use that slogan of Martin Luther King Jr. to enable genocide. Shame on you, Biden. You're a war criminal in terms of enabling those kinds of actions. Let's be honest about that. And I'm not speaking out of hatred. I'm speaking out of the love of a people who are being massacred. So how do we proceed? First thing you got to do, get to the roots of the problem. You got to end the occupation, as well as the ceasefire and the end of the siege on the way to ending the occupation. We got to create a context in which there's Palestinian dignity and equality, along with Jewish safety and security. We don't want annihilation of any people. We don't want genocide of any people, but we've got to be honest and recognize there will never be Jewish security or Jewish safety predicated on Palestinian occupation and domination. How do Jews and Palestinians learn how to live together in a context in which there's equality and dignity and democracy? That's where you have to head. And this talk even about a two-party state is just empty. It's a mirage. It's a subterfuge. Because if you're talking about some highly, highly truncated Palestinian state that is still subordinate to Israeli power and Israeli supremacy, then you're going to reproduce the same kind of domination in a different way. And they say, well, Brother West, you're a dreamer. Yes, that's right. I am a dreamer. I believe, I dream that a precious Palestinian baby has the same value as a Jewish baby, and a Jewish baby has the same value as a Palestinian baby. And of course, I believe that in the United States. I believe that all around the world, that's what it is to be a follower of a Palestinian Jew named Jesus.
So, Dr. West, then, if you had just said that you didn't believe in genocide of the Jewish people, then what should the United States or Israel do with Hamas then, ultimately?
Well, you got to pull the rug from under any effort that would engage in any kind of a violent response. You see, Hamas is a counter-terrorist organization against Israeli terrorism, in the same way that any group that's been terrorized will produce people that try to terrorize others. And if you pull the rug under and you end the occupation and you have conditions of Palestinian dignity and equality, then Hamas would have no reason to engage in any kind of attacks against innocent people. Now, I do believe in just war. So that if in fact there's fights between combatants, Israeli soldiers and Hamas soldiers, that's war. You have just war. I don't believe in killing any innocent baby. I don't care who they are, Palestinian, Jewish, black, white, red, or whatever. There's got to be a moral dimension. But Hamas is a counter-terrorist organization against Israeli terrorism. We can't even get corporate media to talk about Israeli terrorism. The IDF is engaged in terrorist acts. You have to tell the truth. And they say, oh, that's anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Semitic at all. Jews are human beings like anybody else. They have the capacity for love and care, and they have the capacity to terrorize and kill. And we're seeing terror and killing. And if you're going to be against killing, you don't just talk about Hamas. You got to talk about IDF that serves as the larger context. And it goes back, as you know, 75 years were very ugly ethnic cleansing that took place in 1948. It goes back to occupation. It goes back to apartheid-like conditions that Bishop Tutu and Nelson Mandela called. They said it was worse in some ways than South African apartheid. But see, to try to get these truths out too often means you get called anti-Semite. And you say, you know what? Anti-Jewish hatred is wrong, is ugly, is vicious. No doubt about that. But it will not silence any of us who have a moral commitment to any group that's being occupied, dominated, and now having to deal with genocidal attack. And that has to do right now with precious Palestinian brothers and sisters. Now, for the Democratic Party to even have this dialogue is almost impossible. Even when Brother Schumer gave his historic talk on Congress, he didn't say a mumbling word about Palestinian suffering. It was still only about the internal dynamics of Jews. It's too tribal. It lacks any serious moral content. It reminds me of the confessing church in Germany that opposed Hitler because Hitler was making the Christian gospel accommodating to him. They didn't say a mumbling word about Jews. Thank God for Dietrich Bonhoeffer when he said, Christians have no right to engage in Gregorian chants if they don't hear the cries of Jews. but those Christians were so navel-gazing, they only talked about Christians opposing Hitler. They didn't say anything about Hitler killing Jews as well as socialists and communists and gays. Well, the same is true with Schumer and company. They can't say a mumbling word about Palestinian suffering. How come? They're too tied to their narrow view, and they're too tied to the money that's coming in from the various lobbies that are enabling the policies that Biden and Harris and the Democratic Party and company. And of course, Trump is worse. And RFK Jr. is even worse than the other two.
Dr. West, if I may, I apologize for interrupting. But
I'm sorry.
It's okay. No. It's related to what you've brought up, though, previously, only because of your background as a Christian practice professor. There's a viewer who asked, if I vote for you, would you promise to observe the 14th Amendment and keep church and state separate? That's very important to many Americans. Freedom of religion also means freedom from religion.
That's exactly right. Oh, there's no doubt about it. Because you see, when you enter public space, my dear brother, atheists, agnostics, Buddhists, Hindus, Christians, Jews, Zoroastrian, any religious practice, traditional African religion, any religious practice must be protected under the First Amendment of freedom of expression, the right to express yourself. But when you enter that public space, all of us should be willing to acknowledge what informs our conceptions of what it means to be human, how we think about the world. So I enter public space as a Christian, no doubt about that. But I believe in a strong separation, not just with church and state, but state and synagogue, and state and temple, and state and mosque, and state and education. Because you can have certain educational institutions that are disproportionately shaped by the state, and that becomes possibly authoritarian. So I'm very libertarian in terms of protecting the right of persons to express themselves religiously, politically, and so forth. And I'm deeply actually dedicated to defending the right of people who I think are wrong. That's why conservatives and other right-wing folk have the right to be wrong.
Malik,
we just debated in public space.
Malik in Texas, Independent Line, you're on with our guest. Go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say I left the Democratic Party over their obsession with DACA many years ago. I think any independent candidate should have a platform first dealing with what we call these corporate landlords who are purchasing 50% of housing inventory and have manufactured the housing crisis along with mass immigration. Secondly, the platform should include abolishing private mortgage insurance for housing. It's an unnecessary burden upon home buyers that is hurting people financially when the first-time homeowner or even some homeowners. And you can get rid of private mortgage insurance once you either put 20% down or have 25% equity in the home. It's a waste on resources. Also, I think any independent candidate platform should be educating the American people about the creation of Hamas, which was 39 years after the Nakba. The Nakba was a genocidal attempt by Zionists in Israel, and which killed and displaced 500,000 Palestinian people. I also believe Dr. West should have a decent vice president candidate, one that has strong labor ties, working class ties, one who will strengthen labor laws, labor union laws specifically. Also work with the EEOC to strengthen their case law and empty some of their backlogs, because it would make it irrelevant to have a civil rights division that's not functioning due to manpower.
Okay.
And I'll take your comments.
You put a lot out for the guest, Dr. West. Let's start with your VP candidate. Do you have one?
Lord, no, we're getting very close. We're getting very close. But my dear brother's hitting nails on the head. I can tell you that. He's got the right sensibility and sentiments, no doubt about that. And my vice presidential nominee will have very, very deep roots in a working class movements, grassroots organizing, looking at the world from bottoms up, looking at the world through the lens of poor and working people, and at the same time being open to learn and listen. You see, I think part of the challenge these days is that no one of us should be so self-righteous that we're not willing to learn and listen to other people and learn to be self-critical A sign of maturity for me is humility. And the humility is something that is very, very scarce these days, not just in politics, but it's scarce in a country that is so polarized and gangsterized. And you have to be an example, not just in what you say, but in how you say it, in the spirit that you say it. So I appreciate that, my brother. You looking at the world through the lens of working people and poor people. That's so crucial.
In Woodbridge, Virginia, Isaac, Republican line. Go ahead.
Hello, Dr. West. I've been a fan of yours for a long time, and I read a lot of your books and I watch your lectures. And my question for you is, why are you running as a Green Party candidate as opposed to Democrat or Republican when you know this is the only way to win the presidency in this country in this day and age?
Well, appreciate the question, though, brother. Very much so. Appreciate those kind words, too, though, man. But no, I'm running as an independent now, you see. I was only with the Green Party for a very short time, and that was many, many months ago, but I'm an independent now. I see the Republican and Democratic parties as part of a corporate duopoly that are just too tied to big money, big military. They don't have the concerns of poor and working people, let alone the concerns of people around the world who are subjugated by American imperial policies. When I by imperial policies, I mean those policies that would support other states that suppress people. And so I am independent, and you're right. It makes it very, very difficult to win. But you see, we're in uncharted territory right now, my brother. Very much so. We don't know how long Trump's going to stay out of jail. We don't know how long Biden's going to hold on. He may engage in an LBJ moment and have to pull back, and both of them will have to go to their B teams. And we'll have to see what their B teams look like. No labels may still run. And then you've got the rest of us still out there fighting. So I'm trying to be constant, in the language of Jane Austen. I'm trying to be consistent, morally consistent, the way Fannie Lou Hamer talked about it, which is to tell the truth. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak and to seek justice. And justice is what love looks like in public.
LC is next. LC joins us from North Carolina, Democrats line.
Mr. West, I thought you and your twin, Tavis Smiley, had disappeared. What you need to do, you're not going to become president. You've got a snowball chance in hell to win that. But you could get in our neighborhoods and stop our young men from killing each other. The biggest mistake we ever made was giving up our schools. If we followed Martin Luther King off down that road, that dead-end road, I'm going to say that I was in part of the march. I didn't agree with it then, and I don't agree with it now. When we gave up our schools, we gave up our kids. And you and Tavis Smiley, that's who you should pick, and both of y'all go find a cliff and jump off.
Well, brother, I appreciate the love. Good God Almighty, I can see what kind of sensitivity you have to people who disagree with you. Good God Almighty, jump off a cliff? Is that what you have to say to people who've been out here for 50 years? You think I haven't been talking about young brothers I've taught in prison for 41 years? You don't think I've spent time with brothers trying to deal with gun violence? You don't think we've had various pacts and reconciliation activities? You just don't know what you're talking about, my brother. Shame on you. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't know who you're talking to. After 50 years doing exactly what you're talking about, and you talking about jumping off a cliff? And Tavis Smiley jumping off a cliff. I don't want you to jump off a cliff. I want you to be a force for good. If you disagree with Martin Luther King Jr., that's fine. Let's fight for the schools. I've been fighting for the schools. What are you talking about, though, brother? Come on, man. God bless you. You and your family.
That's our conversation with Dr. Cornel West joining us, independent presidential candidate. Dr. West, I want you to address a couple of things on your platform because they're making news even as we're talking today. One step, codify abortion rights as a constitutional mandate. You would nationalize the healthcare industry, including the pharmaceutical industry. How do you plan to? Well, first of all, that first part, why do you think that's necessary?
Well, I mean, one is we have to have fundamental commitment to women having control over their bodies. And we know if there was a debate and conversation over abortion and men were the only ones who could give birth, it'd be a very different conversation. We've got to be honest about the patriarchal content and context of what it means to engage in a discussion about abortion. Now, abortion is in many ways a very, very difficult and delicate issue. There's no doubt about that. And we have to have a sensitivity to the woman on the one hand and also the precious child on the way. But I'm fundamentally committed to women having control over their reproductive rights. And I'm fundamentally committed to taking the greed out of our health system. I don't know why we can't have the same kind of health care system that Congress has, that the congressmen and the congresswomen have, that the military has. Well, they call that socialism. They call that single payer. No, because those are the offices that are tied to national security. Well, I believe that health care, like poverty, like a human right for housing, human right to health care, those are issues of national security too. And the pharmaceutical companies and medical systems have been obsessed with profits. It makes it difficult to satisfy the basic needs of the most vulnerable. And that's why I'm fundamentally committed to ensuring that every citizen has access to quality health care, quality education, safe neighborhoods with communities having oversight over the police. The police is still too often out of control when it comes to brutality. We just had Jenkins and Parker, policemen rendered accountable. I thank God to Brother Malik and Trent, the lawyers down in Mississippi, who were able to follow through. We got to have accountability with our police. We got to make sure if they violate the laws of citizens, especially black folk who disproportionately been targeted by these police, the police have to be accountable. There's got to be public power, not private power, dictating public life. And that's the fundamental issue that we have to come to terms with, because private power is out of control. It really is. It becomes just organized greed. That's the last thing we need.
There's a viewer who asked, you brought up Robert F. Kennedy. He asked, where is your platform different from his campaign, adding, I'm an independent and the two-party system is broken?
Oh, it's qualitatively different. I mean, RFK Jr. Calling Palestinians the most pampered people and saying that that Israel has, any nation has the right to level another nation when they're attacked, as if Gaza is not already leveled. I don't know what RFK Jr. is talking about. He's further to the right on Israel than Newt Gingrich is, and much further to the right than Biden. And it just surprises me. I think that would surprise his blessed and beloved father too in this regard. And the same is true on a number of different issues. He is rightly calling for independent voices and independent candidates. There's no doubt about that. And he does acknowledge the ways in which corporate domination of our politics is leading toward a moral bankruptcy. But when it comes to Gaza, he's on the exact opposite line of the spectrum as I am. And when it comes to any serious talk about what it means to engage in empowerment of poor people, he sees it primarily through the market, whereas I see it through government and market when the market is available under the public policies or public power, under the aegis, let me say that, under the aegis of citizens' power and public power. So he and I are very, very different, there's no doubt. And of course, you know, he's got a preoccupation with the vaccines and so forth. And I do believe that pharmaceutical companies played too much, have been too influential in terms of dictating vaccine policy. But I think vaccines can, in fact, be permissible and desirable under the right conditions. He has a sense that the vaccines in and of themselves are sources of evil. And I think that that's excessive. I think that's hyperbolic. And I think that can be dangerous in terms of trying to mislead people. But it's true that there's been too much corruption in the dictation of public policy in regard to vaccine owing to pharmaceutical companies' power. So he and I have some very deep disagreements. But of course, you know, he's got name recognition and so forth. But I think as we proceed in the months ahead, people will see who the more genuine independent voices are in this move toward the White House.
Have you had any chance to have direct conversation about your thoughts with the Biden administration or the Democratic National Committee?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all.
Tofik, in Washington, D.C., Independent line.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Dr. West, for speaking the truth about the Palestine. You are the only candidate who can represent someone like me, who are an immigrant and who doesn't have any representative in this country. Only you have Republican like Trump who is saying that immigrants are poisoning our blood. You look at this side, you got Biden who is supporting Israel and giving money to bomb civilians. And thank you for speaking the truth. And my question to you is, how much does this cost you? Because you're running for president. I'm sure the powerful Jewish lobbyists are very powerful, and they're firing and they're denying many opportunities for many journalists. They're firing many people. And how much does it cost you financially? I mean, and thank you, Mr. Kanye West, speaking for the truth. And I never heard such a guest like who is logical and who, I mean, how do they sleep like Biden and the others like at night? Thank you, Cispa.
Tofik in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's a powerful point, though, brother. You know, how do you deal with lies and crimes and mendacity and criminality when you're engaging in such massive murder and maiming and now famine, and want to act as if it either doesn't exist or it's something else? I mean, we've seen this over and over again, but it's not just, again, in Gaza, but it's right here in the United States. You can go to Mississippi. That's where I started, kicked off this campaign. In honor of Fannie Lou Hamer, I can go to Mississippi and Lexington with my brothers and sisters and see massive poverty and decrepit schools and inadequate housing and so forth. It's not even a matter of just going to which particular school. All of the schools, when in poor communities, are often so impoverished as opposed to in wealthy communities, you see. So that you're right. You know, you try to the best of your ability, have some moral compass and some spiritual content, because I come from a great Black people who have been terrorized and traumatized and hated for 400 years. But at our best, we always produce love warriors, freedom fighters, wounded healers, and joy spreaders. So and it begins on the chocolate side of town, but it spills over the vanilla sides and a variety of other communities across the board: indigenous peoples, Muslims, new immigrants, people who have been here, white brothers and sisters across the board. It's moral and it's spiritual. And you're absolutely right. We need more of these voices. And keep in mind, you see, my campaign is nothing but a moment in a movement. You have to have people who are organized and mobilized and on the move. And the campaign is nothing but a voice of a candidate that's rooted in the sufferings and the resistance of people who are having their backs pushed against the wall. That's all.
Dr. West, how much ballot access do you have?
Well, we of course, we began with Alaska, with the Aurora Party. Then we moved to the United Citizens Party with the Nellens brothers in South Carolina. It's very interesting because that was the party that Brother Clyburn helped found when he was a real insurgent. He was an oppositional figure in the 60s and the 70s. Now he's very much on the inside of the establishment and very well adjusted to injustice, in my opinion. But I always applaud his early years, and that's the party that endorsed me. I'm on the ballot in Utah. Appreciate that with the people there. On the ballot in Oregon, Progressive Party, and we're on the move. We've got some low-hanging fruits in terms of states we're able to get on the ballot once I make this announcement for both vice president and they open up their particular dates, so that we are very much on the move and trying to make sure that truth, justice, and love has a place in a moment of overwhelming barbarity.
Joseph in New York City, Democrats line. Go ahead.
Good morning, Pedro. I have a question and a comment. Again, my name is Joseph, and I'm out of New York City, a veteran at 75, and I want to thank Professor West for his, I don't know how to put it, but I mean, he speaks truth to power, and it's just a pleasure. My issue is that of homelessness. basic income, and I like that, Professor West. Thank you. We'll be waiting for you to come to New York and give some hope to our people here in New York. What can you say more? What can you say on what your policy will be around basic income? I live month to month, and I get some monies from my retirement. So what can you say on that?
Joseph in New York, thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Brother Joseph. It's very heartfelt, very powerful. And Brother Joseph, you should know that 62% of our fellow citizens live paycheck to paycheck. Now here you were willing to give your life, pay the ultimate cost and price. And now you live in paycheck to paycheck monthly as a veteran. You see, that's a shame. The country ought to be ashamed of itself to treat somebody like yourself, the veteran, in that way. I think it ought to be ashamed to treat any citizen, let alone a veteran, you see. And so when I talk about the abolition of poverty, when I talk about the abolition of unhousedness or homelessness, I'm just making sure that we have priorities such that resources are available so that no one has to be homeless. Now, I've told my beloved wife over and over again, I say, when I win, I don't even want to go into a White House until everybody has a house. I don't want to be in public housing, which is what White House is, if there's no decent housing for the public, for fellow citizens. The president has to set an example. That's also what it means to follow a Palestinian Jew named Jesus. He went into the temple and ran out the money changers, not because he hated the rich. He hated greed. He hated poor people being mistreated. He hated working people being exploited. He hated women being violated. And that's a moral and a spiritual stance. You can be secular and agree with that. You can be Buddhist and agree with that. You can be Hindu and so forth. It's a moral and a spiritual stance. We just need that kind of moral and spiritual awakening if we're not going to go under. The United States is the 68th empire in the history of the species. Every empire goes under owing, for the most part, military overreach, corruption of elites, citizens feeling hopeless, powerless, impotent, and then here comes a Pied Piper who is the tyrant, the fascist, the strong man to lead them out. And right now in America, the level of spiritual decay, the level of moral decadence, the increasing lies and hatred and revenge, we've got to get beyond that. Where's the integrity, honesty, decency, and generosity? Where is the openness to each other? And where is the priority for poor and working people? That's the great contribution of the Black Freedom Movement of Martin King and Fannie Lou Hamer. Rabbi Heschel understood it on the Jewish side of town. Edward Said understood it on the Palestinian side of town. Dorothy Day understood it on the vanilla side of town. It's a human thing. Where is our common humanity, and how do we pass it on to our precious young people? I've been blessed to teach in prisons for 41 years, as well as teach at Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. Why? Because those are contexts where our young people can flower and flourish and undergo maturation, to move toward maturity, to learn how to love and have courage and tell the truth and seek justice with humility and tenacity. I do it with a joy, and of course with a certain kind of style and smile, because I'm a blues man and I'm a jazz man. And you'd go through life smiling with a great joy, given the overwhelming catastrophes that often bombard one.
Who's your favorite blues musician?
Oh, Lord, it'd have to be Muddy Waters, but of course, John Coltrane is the greatest jazz musician, and Sarah Vaughan, we don't have a language for her genius.
Let's hear from Martin in Chicago, Independent Line.
Hello. Mr. West went on a tirade about Joe Biden and blamed him for everything happening in Palestine, never saying a word about Bibi. Then he calls Chuck Schumer tribal. Benjamin Netanyahu was a right-wing extremist conservative from Philadelphia, and you never say anything about him. From October 8th on, Joe Biden and his entire administration have been saying, Israel, you're not taking land from Palestine. We're not going to recognize you on this. They've been pushing back against Israel. It's behind the scenes, but if you pay attention to C-SPAN, you'll notice it. Now, then he went on and said, Democrats aren't doing anything for the working people. Well, I'm working people. I'm a local one iron worker out of Chicago since 1990, and the only political party that supports my union is Democrats. There are no blue right-to-work states, but every single conservative Republican state is a right-to-work state. When Hillary got to Washington, D.C., she tried to get health care for all of America. Didn't work, so she got health care for 8 million kids. That's doing something for the people. Obama, same thing. Health care for America. Doing something for the people. Getting pushed back by all these conservatives, the kind of people that are funding your campaign, dude, and that's kind of sad.
No, I'm got nothing fun about the conservatives. Quit lying on me, brother. I don't get a penny from conservatives, and I'm not supporting Trump. I'm not supporting Republicans at all. And you know, and I know, the United States government has vetoed 3 times resolution for a ceasefire. Biden has not in any way been fighting behind the scenes to get Israel to pull back. He's been providing billions of dollars in order for them to get more military might. I'm not supporting the Republicans. I'm not supporting Trump, and I'm telling the truth about Biden. And you need to quit lying about me and Biden, my brother.
Tom in Ohio, go ahead. You are next up, Republican line.
Yes, I'm kind of impressed with listening to you, and I'm curious about one thing in particular. You know, that everybody's down on the rich man that has the businesses and stuff like that for us poor people to work for, but without them, us poor people ain't going to be working. Thank you.
Well, I mean, one is that poor people in the end has never been solely dependent on rich people. Rich people have been dependent on working people, my brother. The rich themselves couldn't get rich without their workers producing the products, you see. I just want to make sure that there are no poor people. I want to make sure that working people are able to live lives of decency and dignity. And that means they got to have access to health care, not just when the pharmaceutical companies and when the health industry decides and therefore come up with extending to a few million. No, I want all working people to have health care. I want all working people to have a right to housing and so forth. So if we look at the world solely through the lens of the rich, then you're going to say, well, without the rich, then the poor people wouldn't have jobs. No, look at the world through the lens of a system that ensures that working people are treated well and are not exploited by the rich. That's a different perspective, my brother. That's what I'm putting forward here this morning.
Rich joins us from New York State, independent line for Cornel West.
How you doing? What an honor to get on with Brother West. I'd like to speak about Brother Woody that claimed this land for you and me. Of course, I'm talking about Woody Guthrie.
That's right.
That's right. I wonder if you're familiar with the connection with him and the Trumps. I actually found out about this Googling it, and the song Lindbergh, which is basically a history lesson and a song. While I was listening to the song, I was going through some of the other sites and saw one that said, Woody hates his racist landlord. Underneath, it said, Old Man Trump in bold letters. The story goes that Woody, after World War II, came back to Brooklyn, living in an apartment complex called Beach Haven. And when he had some of his black musician friends over to play, the landlord, Fred Trump, caught wind of it and gave him an eviction notice, because not only did Fred Trump not want white tenants, he didn't want his white tenants to have black friends. That's right. How racist.
That's Rich there in New York.
Oh, no, Brother Wick, he's telling the truth. You can see that in any of the history texts or biographies of Donald Trump. His father came straight from Germany, and of course, he was also arrested at a Ku Klux Klan gathering that he brought young Donald to. But the talk about Lindbergh is very important, because he was the most visible member of the America First committee that was founded by Roderick Stewart, who was of the class of 1937 at Princeton. The other most visible member was Henry Ford. Both Henry Ford and Charles Lindbergh received the Eagle Award from Hitler in 1938. They were explicit in their Nazi sympathies and affiliations. Now, that doesn't mean necessarily that America First is always a slogan of Nazis, but historically, the American First Committee with Charles Lindbergh and Henry Ford were connected directly with Hitler. And of course, Hitler had a picture of Henry Ford in his office. Henry Ford is the only American who's listed favorably in Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. You can see it right there in the text. So that Woody Guthrie, progressive that he is, lover of poor people, working people, anti-racist, always in solidarity with black people, he's going to be over against Lindbergh, over against Henry Ford, and certainly over against any form of Nazism and fascism. Woody Guthrie is one of the grand figures in the history of this nation as an artist, and the artists always play a crucial role. There's a sense in which then they're vanguards of the species, just like this powerful picture here, Rembrandt, Prodigal Son, one of the greatest portraits in the history of Europe. And what is that about? The Prodigal Son is about profound love of giving and forgiving as the highest form of giving, the highest form of love. That's what Woody Guthrie, that's what Martin King, that's what Dorothy Day, that's what this campaign is about. The brothers say, well, you got a snowball in hell. Let's see. They said that to the slaves. We broke the back of slavery. They said that to women. They've broken some backs of patriarchy. They said that to workers. And they broke the back of greedy bosses to allow workers to gain access to their rights. Yes, it looks like a snowball in hell, but sometimes the impossible becomes inevitable if you have enough moral courage and organization to follow through. We shall see.
The website for our guest is cornelwest2024.com. He's a philosophy and Christian practice professor at Union Theological Seminary and independent presidential candidate. Dr. West, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Stay strong, though, brother.